John Parker was born in Lexington in the Massachusetts Bay Colony during the spring of 1709, the second son of Josiah Parker, a cordwinder who scraped tannin from hemlock bark to earn enough for a 40-acre plot on the town's eastern ridge, and Hannah Stearns, whose own father had marched in 1690 against Quebec and came home frostbitten and half-blind, telling the boy that war smelled of wet wool and sour apples. From his earliest memory, John knew the smell of powder, because every Sabbath the minister reminded the congregation that Satan walked the woods in the shape of a French Catholic, and every boy who could shoulder firelock drilled on the common after meeting. At 7 he trapped rabbits along the stone walls, trading pelts for nails, so he could build a pine box cradle for the sister who arrived each winter and died each spring. By 9 he could recite the entire roster of Lexington's train band, rank and age, faster than the deacon could read the psalm. Small for his age, quiet-eyed, he learned to listen more than speak, measuring men by how tightly they tied their shoe buckles before a long march. In 1746, when the province raised 500 men to push the French off the northern lakes, 17-year-old Parker lied about his years and enlisted as a private in Captain William Hudson's company. For 8 months he hauled pork barrels and powder horns through swamps that swallowed shoes, learned to sleep with his firelock between his knees so the rain would not rot the lock, and watched smallpox turn strong men into parchment-covered skeletons before they could fire a shot. At Fort William Henry he helped stack the bleaching bones of men eaten by Abenaki scouts, an image that returned each night louder than cannon. When the campaign ended, he walked the 100 miles home with 3 shillings in his pocket and a hollow cough that never fully left his lungs. Neighbors said he had grown old in the face while still young in the beard. Back in Lexington, he bought 10 acres of swampy bottomland no one else wanted, drained it with a hand-dug ditch, and coaxed Indian corn and rye from the mud while teaching himself to read by candle stub, tracing letters in Milton's Paradise Lost because it was the only book the parson would lend to a man without pew rent. He married Lydia Moore, the tanner's quiet daughter who could tan a deer hide so soft it draped like silk. Together they produced 7 children. Burying 2 in tiny coffins, he nailed shut himself, learning that grief was the tax levied on love. Between planting and harvest, he rose through the militia ranks, corporal at 25, sergeant at 28, ensign at 30, lieutenant at 32, always elected by the men who noticed that when Parker gave an order, his voice never rose, yet every foot found the same beat. In 1760, the town chose him captain of the Lexington Training Band, a post he accepted only after warning the selectmen that he would train the men for the war he felt gathering like thunderheads behind the western hills. For 15 years, tension seeped into daily life the way damp seeps into clapboards. Parliament closed the port of Boston, quartered red-coated regulars in private homes, taxed paper and tea and glass and paint, and each new decree felt to Parker like another tightening of the tourniquet around the limb of liberty. He began to hold informal drills at night, lanterns hooded, teaching farmers how to fire by platoons, how to reload while walking backward, how to aim at the epaulets because officers kept the formation together. When smallpox returned in 1773, he led a petition to open an inoculation hospital on the town's edge, personally sitting with the sick through 3 fevered nights, catching the sickness again so deeply that his lungs were left cratered like a battlefield. Physicians told him he might have 5 years if he breathed only warm summer air, 2 if he kept marching in winter. He answered that liberty would not wait for his lungs. On the night of 18th of April 1775, Paul Revere and William Dawes thundered into Lexington with word that 800 British grenadiers and light infantry had crossed the Charles River and were marching west to seize the powder stores at Concord. Parker had less than 2 hours. He sent riders to drum every farmhouse within 6 miles, then walked through the dark himself, rapping shutters with the butt of his firelock, whispering, "To the common, to the common." By 2 in the morning, more than 100 militiamen, grandfathers in wool nightshirts, boys barefoot in the rime, had gathered in the chill fog. Parker formed them in 2 ragged lines on the green, told them they were not to fire first, then stepped aside to cough into a blood-specked handkerchief, while his cousin Jonas loaded the old man's gun because Jonas could see Parker's hands shaking too hard to pour powder. Scouts reported the regulars only a mile away. Parker dismissed every man older than 60 and every boy younger than 16, yet several stayed, saying if they died, they would die at home. At dawn, 77 remained. The British vanguard, commanded by Major John Pitcairn of the Royal Marines, swung into view like a moving crimson wall, bayonets flashing rose gold in the early light. Pitcairn rode forward, sword drawn, shouting, "Disperse, ye rebels, disperse!" Parker, gray-faced, stepped in front of his line and answered, "We have a right to remain here. We are not disturbing the peace." Behind him a farmer whispered, "Captain, they'll fire." And Parker replied, so low only the front rank heard, "Then let us have war here, and not in our kitchens." No one knows who squeezed the first trigger, British or colonial, accident or design, but a single shot cracked across the common, followed by a ragged volley that sounded like ripping canvas. When the smoke cleared, 8 Lexington men lay dead. 10 more writhed in their own blood. The redcoats reformed, cheered, and pushed on toward Concord, leaving the green strewn with Sunday shoes and broken muskets. Parker, ball through his coat sleeve, helped carry the bodies into the meeting house, then mounted the only horse not shot and rode the back roads ahead of the British column, gathering every Minuteman company he could find. All that day the countryside erupted in a running fight that turned the route back to Boston into a 16-mile corridor of terror. Behind stone walls, in spruce swamps, from windows of houses the regulars had torched, Parker's neighbors fired, loaded, ran ahead, fired again, obeying the captain's earlier teaching. Aim at the officers, break their rhythm, make every ball count. Parker himself, fever-burning, led 3 separate ambushes, once crawling so close he could see the white-worsted epaulette knots of a lieutenant before he fired. By nightfall, the British had suffered 273 casualties, the provincials 49. The King's troops staggered into Boston under a moon that looked, one diarist wrote, like a blood blister on the sky. Parker returned to Lexington at midnight, kissed the foreheads of his sleeping children, told Lydia to take them to cousins in Worcester if the regulars came again, then collapsed in the barn, coughing scarlet into the straw. The war he had predicted now swallowed the colonies. During the 11-month siege of Boston, Parker's company rotated through the trenches on Prospect Hill, digging parapets in frozen ground that shattered shovels. Each morning he spat blood into the snow, yet refused hospital. When Washington arrived in July 1775 to take command, the new general reviewed the ragged Massachusetts regiments and paused longest at the gaunt captain who stood at attention, though his ribs rattled with every breath. Congress soon commissioned Parker a colonel of militia, but the promotion felt like a death. Sentence: he weighed 120 pounds on a 5'10" frame, and his uniform hung like sailcloth on a spar. Still, he organized the defense of the Concord road, built redoubts, stockpiled powder, and wrote to every town meeting that the war would be won not by heroics but by persistence, by outlasting, not outfighting the king. In the winter of 1775-76, his lungs hemorrhaged so violently that men could chart his path through camp by the crimson speckles in the snow. Doctors ordered him home. He stayed long enough to drill the raw militia that crossed the frozen river with Washington on Christmas night, whispering final instructions from a stretcher placed beside the boat. When the army moved south toward Princeton, he could no longer walk unaided. 2 sergeants carried him in a litter, but he refused to turn back, saying a captain's place was with his men even if carried like baggage. On the night of 6th March 1777, in a farmhouse near Morristown, New Jersey, he asked for his firelock, cleaned the lock one last time, laid the piece across his knees, and told the militiamen gathered in the room, "When you hear the drum tomorrow, fire low, aim small, finish the work." Just before sunrise he died quietly, age 47, the war still unwon, the new nation still unborn. They buried him in the small graveyard outside the Lexington meeting house, the same ground where his line had stood 2 years earlier. No stone marked the spot at first. Stones cost money the town did not have. Lydia lived another 31 years, spinning flax to buy a simple slate that reads, "John Parker, captain of the Lexington Company, died in the service of his country, 1777. The epitaph omits the irony that he died not from a British ball, but from the consumption he first caught as a teenage soldier, as if the war itself had followed him home and finished what the French wilderness had begun. Years later, when the town erected a monument on the green, they placed it not where the first blood fell, but where Parker had stood, a plain granite boulder quarried from the same ridge he once farmed. School children now recite his order, "Stand your ground, don't fire unless fired upon," without knowing that the man who spoke it could not stand unaided on the morning he gave it, that the ground he defended was the same soil that would cover him, that the words were less a command than a covenant, that free men, when told to bow, may choose instead to load, to aim, to fire, and to keep firing until liberty or life gives out.